you for joining us and being our guest today.
Hi, Erica. Happy to be here. You look a little different with headphones on.
Just a tad bit. Alrighty, so I believe that you got the majority of our questions that the community and board members sent over. Lizzie's going to be the one primarily running the background of it all. And if you have the list, you can feel free to go ahead and get started if you'd like. I do know that if you'd like to go ahead and announce that the police department questions have been sent over to SAC PD, who will not be able to join us today, but we'll answer the questions as well as they're going to be our guests for next month's meeting. Obviously, some of the questions can't wait until next month, so they will try to get to as many of them as they can.
Yeah. Well, I can just start on number one and go through the list. All right.
Sounds great.
So from Lizzie, she said, what will happen to the homeless people that are being housed through the Project Room Key program? And how long will the program run? Room Key is set to end at the end of August. There's a possibility that it might be extended. We currently have about 600 homeless people housed temporarily in motel rooms. You know, that's a very significant number. That's more than 10% of our last point in time count. There are some caveats here. So although that's a remarkable accomplishment and we have never had the resources to get that many people indoors so quickly, it is temporary, it's interim housing. So our issue now is what kind of housing prospects do we have for these folks moving forward? Are we going to turn them loose back on the streets, or are we going to find housing for them? Well, as with anything having to do with the homeless, you have to understand the population we're working with. These folks were placed in housing based on a set of criteria that the county was trying to sort out who was most vulnerable to COVID-19. So older homeless people, people with comorbidities, pre-existing conditions, mental infirmities, things like this made them more eligible for Project Room Key. What that means is that most of the people who are in the motel rooms now will only be eligible for permanent supportive housing. In other words, they're going to need follow-on services probably the rest of their lives. This population is almost exclusively over the age of 55, often over age 65. They are past their earning years. And again, they have an awful lot of serious problems trailing behind them, not the least of which is drug addiction and mental infirmity. So it's a difficult crowd to house. On top of that, you have to understand that this pandemic has just raised hell with everything that we had going. Before COVID came along, our economy was really picking up. We had programs for the homeless that we were building. We had a lot of potential programs in the hopper. They all came to a crashing halt because of COVID for a number of reasons. The pandemic meant that sales tax immediately went flat, and sales tax is about 38% of our revenue in the city. So that immediately put the city in a financial bind. We had projects that were already underway that were funded, and those are continuing, but the ones that we did not have under contract have come to a halt. So the answer to the question, what will happen to the people who are currently housed in Project Room Key? Well, it's to be determined. Understand that it is the responsibility of the county to deal with mental health and addiction issues. That being said, they also are getting much more CARES Act money than the city is. And even as I say that, the city is being more proactive about looking for housing and dealing with other issues. For instance, I have been proposing for 2 years that we get a meth addiction treatment center going because that affects the biggest part of the homeless population. between 60 and 90% of the homeless population at any given time has deep addictive issues. And until we sort that piece out, they're likely not going to be very successful in permanent housing. So I got the council to allocate $1 million to start a meth sobering center. And I'm very happy about that. I've got the county on board, and this is going to be a true city-county collaboration, which is hard to do and a really good thing. I have not heard yet, but I challenged the county to match the $1 million, so we have $2 million to start it up. Once we're in operation for about a year, we will be eligible for federal funding for longevity of the program and to build the program. So to me, that's a very essential piece of dealing with homelessness. And you know, we have a chance finally with the CARES Act money to start to address it. So I think that answered that question. Are there still plans to build homeless shelters that were previously proposed? Absolutely. We are about halfway through building the Meadowview shelter. We've run into a snag at Alhambra and X. Each of these shelters is for triage, an interim, just an interim housing for homeless, to triage them and try to get them into shape for permanent housing. The problem at Alhambra and X is we got full permission from Caltrans to use the space under the freeway at the end of Alhambra at Broadway, well, X Street. And so we paved it, we plumbed it, we're ready to go. And then the Federal Highway Administration said, no, you can't build that shelter there. So we are going to engage in a lawsuit with the federal government so that we can go ahead and use the space that was already given to us with blessings by Caltrans. But we had not finalized the lease with Caltrans before we invested in paving, but we were given assurance that it was a green light. So we've got a little bit of a conundrum there. Additionally, you know, I'm pretty active on this homeless arena, and I have been looking for housing opportunities. Now, coming out of Project Roomkey, you may have heard that the county is considering purchasing a couple of motels to create permanent housing for homeless individuals, possibly permanent supportive housing, but anyway, housing with services. And they, you know, I don't know what the status is with the county in terms of looking for opportunities, but I have been looking in my district, and I'm sure all of you know that I proposed a women and children interim housing community at Patio and Northgate that created quite a stir amongst the community. A lot of people for it, a lot of people against it. We had a big to-do at Rio Tierra School that ended up with a full-blown demonstration led by Rebecca Sandoval and Raul Huerta. You know, I got to tell you, working in the homeless arena is probably the hardest thing I've ever tackled. People are very emotional about it. They all have ideas and opinions about it, but I have to tell you, having worked on this for 5.5 years, there are a lot of components. You know, as I just alluded to, the mental health and the drug components are very significant roadblocks to getting people into housing. And I think that the idea that you can just create a house and put homeless people in it, that you know, that would work for a small percentage of the people who live outdoors. It is a very small percentage. Nonetheless, I think we should do that. Myself and Larry Carr have contended for quite a while that we should invest a fair amount of money in the people who are easiest to serve rather than the hardest to serve, because we could get more people off the street quickly that way. For instance, if, say, a woman is battered, and this is often the case that domestic abuse leads to homelessness, and she finds herself out on the street, penniless with kids, it only takes about 2 or 3 months before that adult is addicted to drugs. And then things start spiraling south. Then, you know, there's a tremendous amount of abuse outdoors, more rape than I care to share, and I know about a lot of it. Many assaults, lots of robbery, larceny. It's really tough to live outdoors. It's not easy. You know, my constituents regularly say, how can you let the city, you know, just go to hell like this? It's terrible. There's trash everywhere. There are hypodermic needles everywhere. People with belligerent behavior. I agree with all of that. It's horrifying to see that in your city, but there are real reasons why people fell into the state that they are in on the streets. It always comes back to bad decisions, or a person was victimized, and that's how people end up on the streets. You know, for many people, it was they were raised up and, you know, became mentally infirm in their childhood, and they couldn't get the resources they needed to cope in society. So, you know, I'm kind of split myself. There are days when I feel tremendously compassionate towards the homeless, and there are days when I'm so angry, I just want to sweep them all away. But no matter how I feel, the reality is this: we have deep societal problems that have led to this aggregation of homeless people. And, you know, I mean, that goes into deep economics that I could talk about for hours. I'm not going to bore you with it here. But right now in Sacramento, and I say this many times, our homeless population is far less than any other West Coast city. And yet the impacts of homeless here are severe. Let me tell you, they're way worse in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, San Jose, everywhere, LA, San Diego. We have issues to deal with, and we need to deal with them. And we are doing the best we can. As far as trash goes, the city has allocated $918,000 this year, dedicated strictly to picking up trash from the homeless. Not to encounter them, not to move them, not to do anything with the homeless, just cleaning up after them. At this particular point in time, because of the Martin v. Boise decision, and again, because of the pandemic and the county order, we literally cannot move a homeless person in a camp. They can camp on your street, they can camp on my street. If they camp on your private property, you have recourse to have them removed. But if they camp anywhere on public property and they're not obstructing the right-of-way, they have the right to do it under current law, and especially under the county order due to the pandemic. So our toolkit to manage the homelessness, as we had been doing for years, is totally decimated. You know, I feel terrible about it. I go around District 3 and I see all the issues. Look, in District 3, we have the American River Parkway that bisects the district, and that's where most of the homeless live. And then we have Bannon Creek, any parkway, Ninos Parkway. These are attractants to homeless people because they can have some privacy there. They can hide a little better. They're less likely to be molested by the general public. And so they migrate to these areas and create great environmental harm to the parkway. You know, it's really tough. It's really tough because currently the laws in the country are very protective of homeless individuals and their rights to camp. So our management toolkit is pretty bad. But you know, now with the CARES Act money, we have already allocated $20 million towards rehousing the homeless. Well, that's way more money than we've ever had. But does 20 million go very far? It's not going to be enough to clean up our streets. We will get people off of the streets. And the last bit of bad news I have about this, and this one really troubles me a lot, part of the county order regarding COVID said that the prisoners in the county jail were very susceptible to COVID and that it was cruel and unusual punishment and they had to be released. So because of state order and the county order, we have released 1,000 felons from our county jail at 5th and I. All of those people became homeless. In other words, they increased the homeless population by 20% in 3 days. So when I look at the 600 we got indoors from Operation Room Key, well, we just dumped 1,000 more on the streets. So there's no net gain. There's no net gain. And to say that that's frustrating for me is is an understatement. I actually, with Daryl Steinberg, went to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and asked her to rescind the no bail rule. In other words, we're not accepting people at the county jail. So the looters who got busted, they got booked and they got released. And some of them went out and looted the second night, and it's because of the zero bail order. So we talked to Tani Cantil-Sakauye, the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, and said, you're killing us here. You know, this can't be. And she said, well, it's tied to the health order. This is a real crisis for the country, and it stands for now. She hasn't rescinded the order yet. But I can tell you that, you know, when I see problems like this, I do the best I can to get to the source of the issue and try to work on it. But all of these things take time, and it seems like every time we take 2 steps forward, we take 5 steps backwards. It's difficult at the moment. I do think things will improve. A lot of that has to do with the pandemic. So that kind of goes to Gary Perdue's question. You know, how do you let your district look so terrible and have all these impacts? The fact of the matter is, as I said, our toolkit is decimated, but we keep allocating more and more resources to cleanup, to services, to triage, to housing. We're not quite ahead of the wave, and so we're not seeing the relief on the streets that certainly I would like to see. Let's see here, the next one. Oh, it's about the impact team. Let me see here. So this is specific to a certain place. Oh yeah, I know what they're talking about here. It's about a homeless camp behind people's homes. I have this all over the district. You know, in East Sac, in North Sac, Gardenland, Northgate, South Natomas. As I said, currently, a homeless person has the right to pitch a tent and live. That is basically what the law says. They can do it on public property. If they camp on your private property, police will come and remove them. If they're blocking a right-of-way or causing imminent harm to persons, we have those tools in our toolkit. But, you know, it's sad to say, you know, I was instrumental in creating the impact team. I got the first $3 million together to fund the impact team to start being very proactive in countering the homeless and asking them to move. And now they're basically, they really can't do much. There's another issue too, which is, as you know, the homeless individuals have been desecrating the levees. And I have been chair of your flood control agency 2 times. And I'm still vice chair of the flood control agency. I've gone to Washington and lobbied and was successful with my partners in getting $1.8 billion to repair our levees and make Natomas safe from flooding. And yet it only takes 1 homeless camp to put a big enough hole in the levee that it puts everybody at risk. So we have AB 1958 put forth by Cooper and McCarty, which would make it state law that if a homeless individual digs into a levee, that they can be removed. And this is a good thing. I support it. It is not law yet. It got shot down last year. I think there's a good chance that it can pass this year, and it really needs to, because right now, you know, if we see that somebody's causing great harm to the levee, we would just go ahead and move them and take the chance of getting sued. And we very likely would get sued, because I have to tell you, there are an awful lot of homeless advocates who fight very hard for the rights of the homeless and excoriate the impact team for taking any action whatsoever against a homeless individual, a camp. You know, it's push and pull. There are people who are ready to sue us at any moment. Actually, Katie Valenzuela, council member elect in District 4, is one of them, who has been pushing for safe ground. and who has sided with Mark Marin, the attorney who regularly sues us about homeless issues. And she is an advocate for the homeless. In fact, she even came out and said that homeless should be allowed to squat in empty houses, even though they're private property. If they're not inhabited, like say they're on the market, she seems to feel that homeless people should be able to go in and camp there. I disagree with that very, very vehemently, but it gives you an idea, you know, there's push and pull in this problem with the homeless. And, you know, frankly, until the pandemic settles down a bit, and it seems to a little bit right now, but until we are free of county and state health orders, we're going to have a real big issue with the homeless population.
Councilmember Harris.
Yeah.
Before you move on, because I think the next topics that were on there were not about the homeless. We had one person, Gia, write in, and she wanted to know how many public buildings that have been abandoned have been identified as possible places to house the homeless.
Well, it depends what you mean by abandoned. You know, I am not aware of many abandoned buildings in Sacramento. There are, I suppose, some. In District 3, there are buildings that are unused, but they are private property. We do have lots that the city owns, like Northgate and Patio. We have 5 acres there that we could consider using for homeless housing, and I have. Again, it creates controversy. We are not going to eminent domain buildings that we perceive to be unused and try to create homeless housing there. Many people have said, well, just use Sleep Train Arena. Well, Sleep Train Arena does not belong to the city, and we can't just go in there and eminent domain it from the Kings, take it away from them, and create a monstrous homeless camp. You know, all of these things take millions and millions of dollars. And right now, because of the pandemic, we used our Measure U surplus from the last year, about $38 million of it, to make ourselves whole and balance our budget for this fiscal year. Next fiscal year, we're going to have double-digit deficit in the millions. And in the out years, looking at it for now with our sales tax projections, things look pretty grim for the city. But understand, this is true of every city. This is happening countrywide. I mean, we're frankly in a depression. This is worse than the Great Recession, in my opinion, because the prospects of coming out of it look like they're very long range. But that's maybe a pessimistic view. Some people think that, look, if we get a vaccine within a year, that we could bounce back, and indeed we could. And hopefully it will go that way. Currently, our sales tax predictions are not happy. So as far as abandoned buildings, it depends what the ownership is. You know, there are no abandoned buildings that don't have some ownership trail. If they're not city-owned buildings, we just simply don't have the right to take them for the purpose of trying to house the homeless. There, we have other opportunities to create deals and use other buildings or build buildings, all of which we're looking at with our $20 million of homeless housing money. Okay? So let's see here. Do you, Lizzie, would you mind just asking the questions? It's a little awkward for me to read them and respond, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also call on the person in case they would like to ask themselves or be unmuted. So the next questions were from Howard Knutson, an NCA board member. Can you provide an inventory of any military type weapons or equipment currently in possession by the Sacramento City Police Department?
Well, that, and yeah, and the follow-up question is kind of the same thing. What's the budget for military type equipment? Well, it depends what you call military type equipment. I suppose to some people that would mean a gun, a loaded gun. To some people it would mean a tank, an armored vehicle, you know, with munitions on it. I don't know what Mr. Knutson's definition of military equipment is, but I don't feel that we have any military type equipment. We have more or less the standard fare that police departments use throughout the country, and yes, that includes munitions. After Stephon Clark perished, we took a lot of actions to change the way our police does pursuits. And I, in particular, pushed very hard for a new foot pursuit policy. Larry Carr pushed very hard for a use of force policy, which actually has been a dramatic change in our police department, and I really laud his efforts. As far as foot pursuit policy goes, you know, police are charged with solving crime. If there is somebody doing crime and doing harm to a neighborhood, their charge is to stop that before it escalates, before people get hurt, or before too much property is damaged. That's why we have a police force, to keep us safe. They also want to keep themselves safe, and they also want to keep the constituents safe while they do what they do. And I believe, some people will certainly disagree with me, I believe that our Sacramento police force is one of the most benign and one of the best forces in the country, because I have seen the way a lot of other police forces do business, and we, I think, do a better job. That's not to say that we get it all right, and there have been incidents that have created great stress to our city, and one in particular that I think was, well, actually a couple, that I think were absolutely wrong. You know, the Stephon Clark incident was a really difficult one. And, you know, I'm not going to go into it one way or the other, but what we did get out of it was that maybe it's not right for police officers to charge into a backyard and put themselves in harm's way, because they put themselves in a situation that was very dark and they didn't have control of all the variables, and it ended up in a shooting. What if we did it a different way? What if we had a policy that said, send in a dog first? And now we have instituted a program to send in drones. We are purchasing a bunch of drones with cameras. So if there is a tight situation with limited visibility and limited intelligence, we can send in other intelligence gathering devices so that officers are not put in harm's way and have to make a split-second decision of life and death. All of these are very positive things that SAC PD has done. We instituted body cams. You know, the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, they don't wear body cams. And I have to say, and I said this at council the other day, what if there were no body cams, and what if we all didn't have cell phone cameras? Would anybody have even known that George Floyd was murdered? We wouldn't know. And that's how America has been for decades, since I was a little boy. You know, an awful lot of people have perished without our knowledge. Some very illicitly at the hands of police, and some people have killed a lot of police persons and gotten away with it. It goes both ways. It's a two-sided conversation. But now we do have those cameras, and things are changing. George Floyd's murderer is charged with second-degree murder. Rayshard Brooks' assailant, the policeman who shot him in the back, has been hauled up on murder charges. And believe me, that kind of thing has really almost never happened before in America. Things are changing. You know, people want change. It's very clear. We all want change. We want a more just society. We don't want to have excessive force used. Can you legislate completely that excessive force won't be used? I don't think it's possible to do it 100%, but we are making great strides. And these types of incidents, I think now that a couple of police officers have been brought up on murder charges, I think police are going to think long and hard before they draw their weapons. And on top of that, we can institute policies that move us in the right direction. So the mayor had a press conference the other day. I participated. We are going to create an inspector general in our Office of Public Safety Accountability to do a truly independent investigation of police shootings. When a weapon is discharged and somebody is injured, we're going to have an independent investigation. We'll still have the internal investigation. The DA will still look into the matter, but the OPSA inspector will, and will have subpoena power. And if McCarty's bills passes, if the OPSA inspector general feels that there is foul play here, it won't go to the DA. It will go up to the Attorney General's office and will be prosecuted in a different way. I think that these are very positive steps to make sure that a better balance is struck. You know, if we make policing too difficult, nobody will sign up for the job. If police feel that they're going to be prosecuted for anything that they undertake, we won't have a police force. So it is a balance. The military equipment piece, I do want to say a little bit about that. Yes, we have munitions. The first council meeting that I officiated, we were purchasing a Bearcat, which is an armored vehicle. And people came to city council and were very vocal that we were purchasing military equipment. That they called it a tank. And they were very loud about how this was the wrong thing for the city to do, to spend 400 grand on an armored vehicle. Well, I made the point then and I stand by it. That armored vehicle is simply that. It's a rubber-tired vehicle that has armored plate on it so that officers can get into an active shooting situation and not get killed immediately. And, you know, if it wasn't for an armored vehicle, Tara O'Sullivan's body could not have been retrieved. It took a while for us to get the Bearcat there and extricate her from that situation. Unfortunately, she was badly injured and she died before even the Bearcat got there. But having an armored vehicle to protect our officers, I believe, is a very good thing. Bear in mind that, you know, we live in a country with a lot of guns, and a lot of people with very bad intent use those guns for horrible things, as evidenced by all the school shootings. You know, we have to be prepared for really tough incidents. And that particular piece of equipment is simply a tool for the police department to create some safety, not only for themselves, but for constituents as well. And bear in mind that the shooting of Tara O'Sullivan was in response to a domestic dispute, which we already know are often the most violent calls that police officers respond to. So, okay, next question.
Oh, so Howard, I know you put hand raised and you're the one that asked that question. So I didn't know if you still wanted to speak for a second. And then there were a few other people that chatted about what you were saying that I think would be nice to just touch upon while we're here.
You know,
I also,
pardon
me for a moment. I also have some emails that I've wrote down from people that have emailed in on the same things that are listening in, but don't want to chat.
Well, first, thank you, Councilmember Harris. Your work and the work of the mayor to reform the police department, it is appreciated. And I know this has been very challenging, but part of the process, you mentioned change. We are not going to be able to know the extent of the change that needs to be made if we're the public, if we're not completely aware of what kind of weaponry or equipment that our public police, the public servants who protect us, what they possess. I'm not proposing that we eliminate that or anything, but we should know. Then that's it.
Well, Howard, let me just respond by saying this. The most lethal thing that our police department possesses is probably a heavy shotgun. And then, of course, they have their sidearms. They do have some rifles. And then there's less lethal weaponry. We have pepper ball guns. We have beanbag shooters. We have an armament that is like a foam projectile. All of these things are meant to stop people if they're advancing and threaten anybody with bodily harm, whether it be a citizen or a police person. That's about the extent of it. You know, we don't have like AR-15 assault rifles. We don't have anything like the firepower that's out on the street. We have a lot of armoring. We have body armor, but a lot of those can be penetrated by rounds from an AR-15, and that's exactly what happened with Terrell O'Sullivan. That particular individual had barricaded himself in the house. He had 5 automatic rifles, all of which could pierce the body armor that the officers were wearing. And that's what happened in that situation. So, you know, honestly, Howard, everything's a balance. We don't want our police officers to get killed, but they do. They get murdered as well as other folks. And I would say that from my point of view, they are not excessively armed, but anybody armed with a loaded gun is lethal, right? The only difference between an assailant and a police officer is that the police officer is trained to protect the public and the assailant is on a bench to try to cause harm. Now, that gets to the issue of training. Since Stephon Clark, we have made every officer take 40 hours of training in mental health awareness, in sensitivity training, what else? A couple other things. So we invested a lot of money, several $1 million, to retrain our police officers to be more aware of mental health issues. And that brings me to something that almost never gets talked about in public, but I feel should. And that was the shooting of Howard Mann, Joseph Mann, sorry. You know, Joseph Mann was a middle-aged, I think he was in his mid-late 50s, African-American man wandering around in Del Paso with a knife, threatening people, very erratic behavior, mentally infirm, on drugs, and the police pursuit in that situation ended up in Joseph Mann's death. Well, to me, that was a travesty and not a tragedy. That had a bad outcome, and it was bad policing. This is my own personal opinion, that those officers, I think in this climate, would probably be arraigned on murder charges. But that did not happen, and that is what people should be very upset about, is the shooting of Joseph Mann, in my opinion. And that really got us working on the whole idea. That's when Larry started working on his use of force policy, was after Joseph Mann. The foot pursuit policy followed Stephon Clark. But, you know, it's hard to atone for the sins of the past. All we can do is look forward and do a better job moving forward. Okay, what next?
All right. So Sashiko also had a question. What is your stance on the SRO officers in Natomas being that the NPA has opposed them for years?
Well, there's differing opinions on that. Should cops be in school? Some people say no, some people say yes. I have worked with some of the SRO officers, as has Jocelyn Navarro, actually pretty extensively with the SROs at Natomas High. And I would say generally that our opinion is that they do a good job. You recall there was a gun incident at Natomas High where a teacher was not shot, but there was mortal danger for both the principal and the teacher. Ultimately, the principal managed to get the gun away from the kid, but the teacher was so shaken that that individual quit, and the principal has moved on as well. You know, don't forget that school shootings were kind of the order of the day in the last 8-10 years. You know, it got to the point where even my own daughter said to me, "Dad, you know, when I go to school every day, I don't know if I'm going to get shot." Well, that really got my attention. You know, students are worried about it because they read about Columbine and all the other shootings You know, for a while, it seemed like there was a shooting a week in America. It's calmed down a little bit recently, but are SROs okay? I think so.
Okay. And then we have Dee. I wanted to let you know, because Dee, I know you're on there. You had a number of questions, so I'm going to ask you if you can pick one. And while you're picking one on this topic, I was going to skip to Heather Fargo's question, which was, what will be the role of the current funded Office of Police Accountability if Inspector General is hired instead?
So we just hired Letitia Watson, and I actually led the committee to hire her. A really interesting individual, and I have high hopes in this woman to create a different kind of conversation with the community. You know, after Stephon Clark, we also created a police commission, which many people said, well, they have to have subpoena power. They want to be able to hire and fire police. And we did not do that as a council. Our Officer of Public Safety Accountability basically took complaints from our constituents and followed through with them on police and tracked internal investigations to try to make sure that they were on the right track. But I would say that the OPSA did not come to much. I think with an inspector general, if you will, in the OPSA, there will be a truly independent investigative body that will create a little more balance, if you will, with the police department so that they can't be too internally protective and yet not feel like there is undue scrutiny and punishment for them doing their jobs. Again, it's the balance that we're seeking to strike. I think the Office of Public Safety Accountability will achieve great stature under Letitia Watson. She has been a former police chief, a former deputy police chief. She's an African-American woman. She has a PhD and a master's. She's incredibly personable, incredibly bright, and incredibly experienced, not only in policing, but in the racism that occurs in police departments. She has been a victim of it. She's lived it. And I think that her knowledge and experience is going to bode very well for Sacramento.
Right. Dee, did you want to unmute yourself and ask a question about this?
Hi, Dolores, by the way. Nice to see you.
While she's figuring out how to unmute, may I speak for a few minutes on some of the emails that I've gotten, if that's okay?
Yep.
Alrighty, so, and I kind of tried to write them down. I'm like you, Vice Mayor. I have a hard time trying to keep up with all this. This is from Ari Lewis Strand, who is a South Natomas homeowner. You mentioned that you were with Mayor Steinberg during the, what did I write there? It says, during the discussion about hiring the Inspector General.
Yeah.
You spoke publicly about Officer Sullivan and her death, yet you say, I'm not going to go in one way or the other on Stephon Clark. You also have the audacity to say that he perished versus saying that he was murdered. Have you publicly made a statement as to where you stand?
Now, Erica.
No, and this is from Ari, and I just wanted to finish it, but yes, go ahead. So I'm just trying to get it. I do have a question of my own, but mine can wait.
Look, there's a lot of emotion right now.
Very true.
I've been to the demonstrations. You know, I watched from the street, not from my computer, what was going on. If challenged to say my particular feelings about Stephon Clark and the fact that this person used the word audacity tells me about the level of their emotion. If you look at the reports on the Stephon Clark shooting, the internal investigation, the DA investigation, and we kicked it up to the Attorney General of the state of California, they all reached the same conclusion, that this was not murder. And I personally believe that it was not murder. I believe it was a tragedy. You know, Stephon Clark was a troubled young guy, hyped up on a lot of drugs, and he was breaking out windows, and he was committing felonious acts. And it was, I think, more a failure of policy and certainly not intent to kill or murder that led to his death. That's what I believe. That's what the Attorney General believes, and the DA, and the internal investigators. Now, again, I think that there were policies that were not clearly stated at the time that may have led those officers in the quest to apprehend a person who was causing harm to the neighborhood, that put them in harm's way and made them act in self-defense in a way that led to Stephon Clark's death. And I think it's a tragedy, but not a travesty. Whereas Joseph Mann, I think, was a travesty and not a tragedy.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. Dolores, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right, go ahead.
Actually, this has to do with item 11 in the document that Angelique Ashby has proposed. And I just wanted to recommend, again, getting back to the issue of balance, looking at both sides and looking at every piece of information that can be gathered to try to balance. Because not everybody is right, not everybody is wrong. People make stupid decisions and make take stupid actions. And that applies to both sides. So I'm recommending, which I sent to Lizzie, that the report that is, or recommend that the development of any prepared data should cover some period of time. I'm suggesting 2015 to 2019, and that it should include the types of crimes that have been committed, whether they're misdemeanors, felonies, the numbers of those types of crimes, the suspects, whether they're male, female, age, race, criminal history, family history, and then citizenship. I'm also suggesting that it would be kind of interesting to get a geographic breakdown as to where the crimes are being committed. Is it more in one place than another? Is there a difference, say, if you have two areas within Sacramento that have equal numbers of crime, then compare how many felonies versus misdemeanors, the criminal suspects, and then just start doing a comparison. Because I think that if you're gonna try and solve a problem, then you really need to get right down to the grassroots of where some of the problems lie, and some of that lies with the people who are committing the crimes, not just the officers who are trying to protect the public, and not just against some of the protesters who have done harm to our local businesses, and including some of our people. It would be good to know a little bit more statistical data about the types of crimes, who and whatevers that are being committed in our city and our county.
So Dolores, we capture all that data. And in fact, a lot of it is accessible to you. I didn't come prepared with the website, but all of our commands, we have 4 commands in Sacramento. We put out data monthly on all the crime in their command, in the area, and it's sorted by, violent crime, property crime. And now, as far as the information on who is perpetrating the crime, that is usually protected information unless there is an investigation that comes to a conclusion. So if something is going to go to trial, that is not public information until an investigation is complete. And I think you can probably understand why.
Absolutely, yes.
But an awful lot of that information is available to you, and I will make sure that we get the website and you can access it at any time. So for South Natomas and Gardenland Northgate, we have very specific crime stats that have been collected over the years that I've been in office, but it's gotten sharper and sharper. And now it's an interactive website where you can actually query it. And it's really a pretty good tool.
And actually, well, and the reason why I even mentioned this, Jeff, is not so much because, even if I have the knowledge, what am I going to do with that? that could affect and improve how our city is and how our county is. But I'm suggesting that if we're going to organize and fund a group of people to study the kinds of things that can be done to make our city and county safer, then they ought to start actually look at the types of crimes, who's committing them, where are they being committed, why are these happening, and try to use some of that data to help come up with some answers. I think one of the things you pointed out is we do have a lot of homeless people who are mentally impaired, and because of their circumstance, they are committing some crimes. Some are very minor in nature, and maybe some not so minor. But the thing is, if we know more about the basis of the problem, maybe we can start coming up with ideas on how to address them. And if there's going to be an organized group to look at this, then I'm just suggesting that maybe they take a look to see what has been happening and why.
Well, so Dolores, I agree with everything you said. And that is exactly what the police department does. They have analysts who, and they have all the information. You know, when they apprehend somebody, they know their background. They gather a lot of information. You know, up to including their fingerprints, you know, their home, where they grew up, even background information. So the police have that data, and up to this point, they have been the body charged with doing the very analysis that you're talking about.
So will they also then, will the mayor and the council roundtable that's being proposed, will they access that information? I guess what I'm suggesting is they do access that information to consider it as they start looking for ways to solve some of the problems that we have.
If we were to do that, Dolores, we would rely on reports from crime analysis from our police department, because I can tell you that
Yes,
council
exactly.
members are not going to sit around a round table and go over crime reports, you know, for umpteen hours,
Right.
thinking that we might get a kernel of information that would make us come to better policy decisions. We rely on the experts to bring that analysis to us so that we can use that to inform our decisions.
And that's pretty much, that's all I'm proposing, just suggesting that, you know, this group do, is get the 4 commands to pull that information together and provide it to the mayor and the roundtable council for discussion.
Well, I would say that we'll work on it. You know, I mean, I don't consider myself a crime analyst, but you know, I have regular meetings with East Command and North Command captains, and we talk about what kind of crimes are being perpetrated, who are the people doing it. So informally, we do that district by district. We have never done that citywide as a council, but that would be something to bring up with the OPSA, with Letitia. Because that would really be something that falls in her purview to understand the nature of crime citywide.
Thank you.
She's a cool woman. I hope you get to meet her.
I hope so too.
So Councilman Harris, so we have MBL, I'm not sure what your name is, but MBL wants to know, what is the benefit to the community in the continued contract with ShotSpotter?
So, as you know, we do have gang issues in the city. We have had drive-by shootings. We've had many, many shootings in the city. On average, we have about 2 homicides a week in Sacramento. I'm not sure that people are fully aware of that, but you know, a lot of people get killed in Sacramento. You know, anything from home invasions, drive-by shootings, robberies. In fact, just recently, North Command solved a series of shootings on Northgate. And it turns out, happily, that they weren't specifically gang related and the shooters were not from the area. But they have solved a number of violent crimes in this area, in South Natomas, Gardenland, Northgate. The police, believe it or not, actually get a lot of work done. They do solve a tremendous number of crimes. So, oh gosh, I lost the question. Can you get me back on track, Lizzie?
What benefits? Let me try to find it as well too. What is the benefit to the community of the continued contract with ShotSpotter?
Oh, ShotSpotter, great. Thank you for, so because of all these shootings, we know that there are a couple of areas, 3 areas in particular, North Sacramento, around the Meadowview area, and believe it or not, in East Sacramento, where there have been a preponderance of shots fired. Well, if we rely on citizens to call in and report shots fired, the response times are not good enough for officers to respond very often to either catch an assailant or be the first one there so that there is evidence to gather that hasn't been tampered with, to get statements and to get the information they need to solve those crimes. ShotSpotter, I think, is a really good tool, and police would tell you that it has helped them apprehend a number of shooters because it instantly alerts to the police and tells them exactly where shots are fired. So if they've got a cruiser in the neighborhood, they can respond very, very quickly. It is, like everything, a tool that is used to help solve crimes, and it has been very effective. The police swear by it. Chief Hahn thinks it's a great tool. My captains thinks it's a great tool. I don't have personal experience with it, but I rely on their opinions that it is helping them solve a lot of violent crime in Sacramento.
The same person, MBL, also asked if you could share some of the perspectives that you've heard on policing from your constituents. Have they been very similar to the views you've expressed today, or have you been hearing different?
Well, it's honestly, it's mixed. I have a number of constituents who believe that our police, by and large, do great work. I think everybody is deeply troubled when somebody is shot by a police person, as well they should be. With the advent of body cams and the transparency policy that we've put in place in Sacramento, where any and all tape recordings of a police shooting are released within 30 days of the incident, that means that lay people like us, just citizens, get to see video recordings of these kinds of shootings. You know, all of them are deeply troubling. It's really pretty awful thing to see somebody die on camera, right? I mean, it's not the movies, folks. This is for real. And when these things happen at the hands of a police officer, it's doubly upsetting. You know, we often don't get, we obviously don't get body cam footage of an assailant shooting a constituent. Sometimes we get body cam images of a perpetrator shooting a police officer, because that happens plenty as well. You know, police officers do die in their positions. So we get all of this visual information, and it's just human nature to form an opinion about what you see. You know, when you look at, say, the tape of Stephon is deeply troubling, and you can come to conclusions that investigators did not come to because they have more information than just what is seen visually. But
Councilman Harris? Oh, you just muted yourself. You can
oh, sorry about that. Thanks for the heads up. Well, I was just saying that, you know, all the film footage that we have available is a blessing and a curse. Like I alluded to previously, if we didn't all have a camera and the willingness to use it, we wouldn't have known about George Floyd. And if we didn't have body cams, we wouldn't have known about Rayshard Brooks. This is a change, and a lot of it's good. From my point of view, it's very important, and certainly as an elected official, for me not to jump to conclusions until I have the maximum amount of information available to me But, you know, I'm not a police officer. I don't solve crimes. I don't do these investigations. And as I said, my opinion about Joseph Mann is my opinion. Because I'm elected, I am privy to an awful lot of information about that incident, but not all of it. And anything that I say wouldn't stand up in a court of law. And the fact of the matter is, no matter whether you feel a person's guilty or not, you still have to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt in a court in America, which is the basis of our freedom. And sometimes justice is carried out, and sometimes there's a true miscarriage of justice. But that is our system, and that is, you know, an essential element of democracy in keeping us free.
So we have a few more questions about police reform, and then a few random ones if you have the time. I know that.
You know, at some point, please leave me 5 or 6 minutes to tell you about all the good stuff we've been doing.
Yeah. Yes.
Because there is actually really good news in District 3.
So Gia, I'm not going to forget your question. I'm going to go to the police reform ones, and I'll skip back to yours, which is a slightly different topic. So where do you stand on putting more social workers in the police department?
So they're very different disciplines. Now, the impact team does a lot of social work. And the mayor proposed the other day that we do not send police officers out on any calls that do not involve a crime. In other words, to extricate things like social work from the police. In fact, the mayor contends that we send police to solve all of our problems. You know, I mean, virtually everything we send public safety. For instance, and this is a true story, I did a 24-hour ride along with our new Station 15 in the fire department. And a lady called up in great distress, and we went out there, sirens, lights, everything, with a fire truck and an ambulance. And when we got there, she said, well, my spatula fell behind the stove. Can you help me get it out? And, you know, this is really problematic. First off, it costs you and me a lot of money to respond to calls like that. But the point is, public safety responds to everything. So what we're going to try to do is to do a system called differential dispatch, where we can actually send the appropriate response to various issues instead of going with an armed police officer to a situation that doesn't require somebody who can handle a really tough situation like that, so that we don't send all kinds of fire equipment to, you know, a drug issue case. Or the fact of the matter is, we use our public safety officers, both in fire and PD, to respond to almost every distress call in the city. The mayor contends that we should separate that out, that we should do differential dispatch, that we should create another department with social workers to respond to mental health issues, to respond to homeless calls where there's no crime being committed. And it would be a very different way for this city to respond to calls. And I think it has promise. Personally, I think we should try it.
Right. And then where do you stand on the debate between those who want reform to reform the police and activists calling for defunding of the police?
Well, this is a tough question. I got 6,000 emails imploring me to defund the police. I mean, it was a campaign, it was a tactic to bomb all the email boxes of the council members and make it very hard to do business, which it did. When you say defund the police, of course, that means different things to different people. Clearly, the city would be in total chaos if we didn't have a police force. At least I believe that. I'm convinced of it.
Yep.
Because the police do a lot of really valuable work for our society and our community. When you say defund the police, I'm not sure I really comprehend the message. If the message is that we need less police, because if we have fewer police, there will be fewer police shootings, I'm not sure that that's accurate at all. After the recession, our police force was reduced by almost a third in 2009. We lost our gang task force, we lost our vice squad, we lost our motorcycle cops. We lost a lot of aspects of policing that many of my constituents have called for to come back. We lost community-oriented policing, which was a really valuable thing because under the COPS program, officers stayed on the same rotation for years and got to know their beat, right? Beat cops. You got to know the officer in your neighborhood. You created that relationship. It was a really valuable program, I feel, but it got defunded because of the recession. I personally feel that our police force has already been defunded. We never have built back to the level of policing that we had in 2008. And things were going relatively well at that time because we did have special units, you know, like I say, for vice, for drugs. You know, we had, you know, specialty teams that became experts in working on specific types of issues. But we don't have that anymore. And we have a police force that's still down by 80 officers compared to what we had at one point. If we do this differential dispatch and if we extricate our public safety officials from responding to non-crime related calls, I think then that with our already somewhat decimated police force, they can get back to the business of policing simply crimes and not all these other things, and that maybe we can get back some of those specialty teams that I think were valuable, and I know the police force believes were valuable. So when people say defund the police, you know, at this point in time, we're not going to fire a whole bunch of police officers and take that money and put it into social work. We can't afford to do it, quite frankly, and it won't make the community safer, in my opinion.
Okay, and that is pretty much what I meant. That was actually my question. So I was just wondering if it may be time. I know we're already shorthanded and people aren't applying to our police department like we'd like. I'm just wondering if we're going to continuously put more money into SAC PD, or if maybe we should be putting money elsewhere since the schools are being cut. There's mental health problems that are everywhere. So I was just wondering where we were looking to draw back on it from. That was my question. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
So Erica, you know, a big amount of our general fund goes to the police department. There's no doubt about it. It's a big number. But if you look at what the function of government really is, it's to create public safety first and foremost, to make sure our citizens can live a free life and a safe life. Do we disproportionately invest in the police department? Well, I know that some people argue that we do. You know, the police have a strong union and they make good wages, and they negotiate contracts every couple of years, and the council has to make decisions about that and take on a big battle with the police union or, you know, give them raises. And so these are decisions that the council does make every couple of years. After the recession, the police took a real haircut in wages and in benefits, because they would rather lose some of their wages and benefits than have a bunch of people laid off. Again, it's a balance, and it can be argued either way, whether the council makes a good or bad decision. There's a thing called binding arbitration. And binding arbitration gives the union a really big bargaining chip. It would take a charter change to get rid of binding arbitration. If there was not binding arbitration, the council would have a better bargaining position to try to hold the line on increases in benefits and wages. And then to balance that, we would have attrition in the police force because, frankly, other jurisdictions pay more than we pay in SAC PD. For instance, we lose a lot of officers to Roseville because it's an easier job and they pay better.
Indeed. Thank
So
you.
those are the decisions we're up against.
Thank you very much.
You
The
bet.
last two questions that we'll take today actually are on two very different topics, and then you can have the floor. So the first one is about universal income. Has there been any thought to providing a base income like what Stockton has done, especially for minorities to gain success over the long run and stay free of dangerous endeavors?
What do you mean by universal base income? So this is a new one to me.
Yeah, I think she's specifically, Gia, I don't know if you can unmute your line or if you want to provide in the chat box. And I think she's referring specifically to what Stockton, the city of Stockton did, which I can't remember off the top of my head how much money they give per month to everybody in the city. Gia, are you there? Looks like Gia is no longer with us, so maybe I can ask for her to clarify and just contact your office, or?
Absolutely. And you know, Gia has a garden plot right next to our garden plot at Ninos, so she can track me down pretty easily.
Oh, okay, good. All right, and then the last question had to do with the suicide of the student that happened in Natomas. And I'm not very familiar with it, but I know Erica and others are, if you need more context. But this person wrote, did you reach out to the family of the student that committed suicide that attended Natomas High School during the pandemic? And then if not, why?
So I have to admit, I did not reach out to the parents of the student, but I did reach out to the administration. So, and honestly, I don't know the conditions of that suicide. I don't know what happened. And Erica, if you do, and you want to enlighten me, that would be great.
I do, but I think that was through an email. So what I'll do is forward the email, and then I'll also just contact you and we can talk about that a little bit off. I don't think that it's appropriate to talk about her suicide, especially while it's being recorded for the family's purposes.
I happen to agree with you.
Yeah,
And,
so.
you know, I actually feel that suicide is very personal and very protected. Certainly sending a note of condolence is not an invasion of privacy, but at times it can be. And so I was loath to do that, and perhaps I'll get criticism for that, but suicide is a very difficult subject.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get criticized for it. She has a very adamant, and I think the whole thing is that it was an ongoing problem. So it brings to the point of when do we start holding the superintendent accountable, because the child was troubled for a long time. And if maybe we did have counselors and psychologists and more people on the payroll versus paying the superintendent $300,000+ a year, maybe it could have been avoided. But we will talk about that at a later time. And the floor is yours, and you have 13 minutes.
So once again, you know, school issues are not my purview.
Yeah.
You know, a council member doesn't run the school district. We interface somewhat, but it is a very different system, funded completely differently, and I have absolutely no clout in the school district over how they spend their money. The school board does, but not the city council. So that's that. Okay.
Hold on for just a moment, because they have sent text just with, they said that is very true, but the bottom line is that some council members seem to be very chummy with the school, Natomas Unified School Board. If you could possibly speak or meet with the superintendent a little bit more and fight for the South Natomas schools so that they could get some of the things of the North Natomas schools, maybe they wouldn't be such a bad place to be. But this too is something that needs to be directed, and I will direct them to the board members. I have 2 grants on the line, so one of them is, so I'll take care of that. So thank you, and I will not interrupt anymore.
Okay, a couple of things I want to say about our response to the pandemic. This is a tremendously unique situation that has caused a lot of things, as I said before, to kind of fall apart. You might recall a year ago, I got a bunch of money for the Natomas Garden and Arts Center to rebuild the old Station 15, and to do street lights on Northgate, to start rebuilding some of the decrepit fences on Northgate. The money's still there. It hasn't been spent. It was allocated, so it can't be spent on other things unless the council decrees an emergency and pulls all available dollars for an emergent purpose. But all of these projects that were not under contract when COVID hit have been put on ice for now. The lights on Northgate are moving forward. They are getting designed and the equipment will be procured because we had already set that ball rolling. The Natomas Garden and Arts Center has a start in design, but at this juncture, you know, we've got really big problems in the city. And so it is temporarily on hold, but it will not be forever. And we will get that Garden and Arts Center built. Unfortunately, I can't give you a viable timeline because, you know, quite frankly, we're making decisions every day. We've had many emergency council meetings about what to do with funding, what to do with contracts, what are the essential things we need to fund, how are we going to deal with the deficit, you know, are we going to have to lay people off? So we've got some pretty big fish to fry about that. You know, as a result of the pandemic, I was able to get a tremendous number of face masks donated to Stanford Settlement and Mutual Housing at River Gardens and the greenhouse, basically. So that was a good thing. We also got the gig car share to assist Stanford Settlement in delivering meals to seniors, which I think is, Julie will tell you, has been a really big help to them. So we're real happy we did that. Jocelyn has been a real superstar lately. Joey's Food Locker at Natomas High needed a bunch of grocery bags. So she went to, you know, Rayleigh's, I believe it was Rayleigh's or maybe Bel Air, and they agreed to donate. So we transported 1,500 bags to Joey's Food Locker. You know, these are little things, but they make a big difference to the community. And, you know, I'm real proud of Jocelyn for the work she's done. I organized a couple of basically forums, electronic forums about the money we are dispersing to local businesses to try to get them through the pandemic. Out of that came a council action last night in which we're allocating $10 million in the near future in forgivable loans. So essentially a grant program to help small businesses weather the storm, if you will. And we are going to be pushing out a lot of information. We know that businesses on Northgate, a lot of people aren't connected to the web, you know, so we're going to have to walk it out on the street and make sure that people get the information, which we are going to do in the next few days. But I think that this was really good work. Now, the CARES Act money is $89 million. Thus far, we've allocated $12.5 million to direct relief to small business. I am advocating and going to hold out for $30 million for direct relief. Larry Carr is looking for a tenant relief program, so help, you know, rental assistance program. And then, you know, we're looking at job training because frankly, a lot of small businesses are going to go out of business and people need to get retrained. And hopefully we can train them to get higher paying jobs. We did commission a survey and we got a lot of demographic information, and it turns out unequivocally in the survey that the Latino community has probably been hurt the worst economically by the COVID pandemic. And we're going to take steps to address the equity issues in all of this. The first round of money, the first $1 million we gave away to small business, there was not much equity in the way it was distributed, but this time it will be very well attended to in that regard. You know, on a much lighter note, my office, of course, created Natomas Pops in the Park, and it was really building steam and becoming a pretty popular event. And even ESAC Pops in the Park, which has been going on for 29 years, this year we had a virtual concert. And it went off pretty well, you know, I mean, it was well attended and we raised a bunch of money for Women's Empowerment, which is a great organization that I highly support. We still have a Pops concert planned for early August at Natomas Community Park. It is still in play whether or not we will be able to have a gathering in public of that magnitude. Totally depends on the county order. We'll have to make a decision a go, no-go decision in July, early July, about whether Natomas Pops will happen this year. Right now, it doesn't look favorable, but I'm still holding out a little hope, but I'll let you all know whether or not we're able to pull that off. I wanted to say that, you know, it's not all police and money and policy and doom and gloom. There are things that I get to do as a council member that are immensely gratifying, like trying to create a butterfly flyway on the Niños Parkway. And we started by planting a pollinator garden, and we're getting students involved. The vision is to plant milkweed all up and down the parkway and to attract monarch butterflies by the thousands and make it a destination annually for people to come to Northgate, South Natomas, and see this fantastic show of nature. Now, you know that it started with Steve Cohn, but my office actually built the Niños Community Garden. And it was a result, you know, because of the mutual housing there at River Gardens. People were basically squatting on parkland and created a community garden. There was a big row about it. You know, now it's called the International Garden of Many Colors. Those people were very, very resistant to move into the new beautiful garden space that we created for them. So we came to a compromise. They get to stay in their old garden, but we created this new big community garden, and there are many empty spaces. This is not only the nicest community garden in the city, it's also one of the emptiest, and almost every other community garden has a wait list for more than a year to get a garden plot. And there are 20 gorgeous plots available at Niños Garden. You know, it costs a little money to get in. It's a $50 fee just to start and $25 a year to rent the plot. Well, you know, and that frankly is a monetary barrier for some people. So I have offered to pay the $75 up front for the first year if a person will commit to gardening for 2 years. So they would have to pay $25 the second year. But I want that community garden filled. It's a beautiful space. And there is even an orchard that is, the fruit is free for the picking to the people who participate in the garden. It's a wonderful community amenity that's going unnoticed. And so I'm going to try to subsidize and get people involved, not only because I'm an avid gardener, but because you can grow hundreds of dollars of groceries on these plots. So my office rented one, and we've got a really nice garden going with flowers and more vegetables than we can eat. And I got to tell you, Jocelyn has never gardened before, and she's over the moon about this. It just, you know, during this pandemic, she's needed a place to go, somewhere to get outside, breathe some air, and do something fun. And it's hitting the sweet spot for her. So that, of course, is a huge delight for me to see how much she's getting out of it. Well, man, I've been talking for an hour and a half. I'm pretty well spent. I just want to leave you with this. I know that my views don't coincide with everybody's, but I am always open to a conversation as long as it's two-sided. You know, I don't think that my views are 100% the right ones, but I am in a decision-making position. As an elected official, I have to make decisions about things that affect the city every day and in every way. And I am always open to discourse. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate this forum tonight. I haven't been asked so many direct, hard-hitting questions in my entire tenure in 5.5 years. This has been pretty intense for me, but you know what? I love it. I love this discourse. I care about this community very much. I mean, I'm dedicating the end of my career to public service, and there's a reason for that. You know, I love Gardenland, Northgate, South Natomas. I love East Sac and River Park, and it's very gratifying to me when I do make a good decision and something good comes of it. You know, that's a pretty big reward. But you know I can't solve everybody's problems. I know that some people will completely disagree with me on an issue, but that's America. You know, that's the good stuff. It's how we rub against each other. And if we do it with decorum and we do it with respect, we just get stronger. I've always believed that. I still believe it. And so for that reason, I appreciate all of you and your candor and your honesty. So call me anytime you feel like it. Our office, although we're not at City Hall, we still answer the phones.
We appreciate you, Vice Mayor. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Have a great night, and thanks for letting me expel so much hot air.
No, thank you. Oh, Amy's blowing you kisses.
Amy, I'm
Thank you.
sorry you broke your ankle. I hope you're doing okay.
She's
Good.
like, yes. I just want to thank you all. I'm with Vice Mayor Harris. I'm loving this platform. You guys all came out. It was productive. It was an amazing conversation. It was respectful. I do want to give an ultimate thank you to Lizzie, because without you, there would be no NCA. You are truly the backbone of this, and thank you very much for all you do.
Well, thank you, everybody. Like, no, it's my pleasure. And what I did notice, and I might send you all a little survey afterwards just to see how we could maybe
Survey.
do these meetings a little better, get feedback, since this was our first Zoom. But I did notice a lot of discussion taking place in the chat about SRO officers. And one thing I'd like to propose or throw out there is maybe for our July meeting, we just have it be a topic and everyone can come and talk about SRO officers. It seems like a lot of you have a lot of thoughts, and we can try to compile that and see what kind of actions NCA can take to advocate at the school board level, or work with our police department and counterparts to provide them feedback about what we would like seen in Natomas schools.
And we can reach out to the district and try to get the SROs and the person over the SROs there, because it's not directly going to be, you know, our contact with the city. But I think that that's a fabulous idea. I think everybody has something to say about SROs. So that'll be good.
Lizzie, one last thing. Jocelyn just texted me and said I left out a pretty important piece. So in response to the pandemic, the city started the Great Plates program, which was to deliver free meals to seniors. And in so doing, engage restaurants that were losing their shirts to create those meals. It's been a great program. It serves 1,100 seniors who are housebound, who couldn't get out. And we've engaged something like 44 local owned restaurants to create those meals, and created well over $1 million of revenue for these restaurants. And it's just been a fabulous program. I believe almost 20% of the meals were delivered in South Natomas and the lower part of North Natomas. So this area is being served very well by the Great Plates program. So it helped restaurants, and I'm particularly excited, and again, because of Jocelyn, we worked hard to get 524 in the program. And, you know, it's one of our favorite restaurants, and it's in Northgate. And so with her dedicated effort, they were able to apply and get accepted to the program, and it's created a fair amount of revenue for them. It all adds up to, you know, just helping each other out and helping everybody get through this really tough time. We've got a ways to go, folks. The pandemic isn't over. And I really hope that you'll all stay safe, stay distanced, wear gloves where appropriate, certainly wear masks in enclosed spaces, and take care of your health. Don't get sick. It's a tough disease. All right.
Amen.
My best to
Thank
all
you.
of you. Take care.
Thank you. Former Mayor Fargo, we usually have the board members out once a year, and Twin Rivers is always invited. Oh, I think we lost her. So, oh, Jeff leaves and everybody leaves. Well, thank you for the ones that stayed. So this meeting was fabulous, and this meeting is adjourned. If you have any further comments or questions, please feel free to continue to send us emails, and we will forward everything that needs to go to the correct people. And we look forward to hearing from you guys with our brief survey. Thank you.